Okay, well, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to CX World. Welcome to this session. Thank you for attending. Apologies, we had a slightly delayed start this morning, but not to worry, we will finish plenty on time, so the rest of your day's agenda will continue as planned. So, by way of quick introduction, my name is Hamad, and I'll be leading this session today on life design, or as I call it, LYFE, my company. يعني تجرب Alhaya, and this is a new framework and concept that I've recently launched but have actually been developing, evolving and practicing in different ways for about 20 years and has now become part of my main focus. In today's agenda, actually we were intending originally to have a workshop format, but it's turned out to be a seminar format, so I hope you don't mind that. What I will do is spend the time talking us through some of the key concepts and techniques as part of life design. There are some tools and methods that I was hoping we could use together, but that will all be available to you afterwards. If you come and see me and pass me your contact details, I can send you the worksheets that you can have a look at, and I'll be happy to answer any future questions if you'd like to do that. So for today, we'll look at it more as an interactive learning as opposed to hands-on workshop. So I'll take us through the content in presentation format. I would really like it and encourage you to ask questions. If you'd like me to stop and explain something, or if you want to interrupt me, that's okay. Let's all be very relaxed and make it an informal session. So whether you'd like to do that as we go or at the end, you're very welcome. So just by sort of way of brief intro and agenda, I'm going to start by explaining high level the concept and how I came about the idea of life design and what it really means. I'll talk then about how we go about that, some of the tools and methods, and specifically that will be inspired today by that of customer experience. So as you can imagine, this is a CX conference, and I'm not sure about all of you, maybe I'll ask some questions in a moment. But I suspect you all have either an interesting customer experience, maybe you practice it professionally, maybe you work in customer service or experience. So I'm going to show you how the ideas and methods that we use in customer experience can be adapted to life experience. But actually it can go beyond that using some other ideas that I'll explain shortly. So that will be the sort of core of the content, is the methodology and tools. And then finally, we'll just summarize with what you can do and take to the next steps, how you can learn more about life design as a key concept. So I hope that's all okay. Before we continue, does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make? No? Maybe a quick show of hands. Who works in customer experience related roles? Okay, probably about half of you. And who works in, let's say, consulting and professional services? Okay, government? Okay, a few of you again. And a slightly different question. How many of you have ever used a service like a life coach or a career coach, perhaps? Yeah, not so many, but a few. Okay, right, so quick introduction to me. I won't read the whole statement, but basically, I'm a designer, okay? I've been a designer for over 20 years, and throughout that time, I've held a very central passion, which is human-centered design. So I sort of kept my philosophy and all of the work that I do, thinking about other people, who they are, what they need, how their environment is, and then how do I design the solutions I've been asked to design with that in mind. So not what I want to do, not what my manager would like me to do, or not what my brand guidelines tell me we should do, but really trying to connect those constraints with the needs and the empathy that we have for the people who are going to use that service. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But I've been doing that in lots of different ways, particularly in the last 15, 20 years, has been in consulting. So just to give it a little bit of background, I've worked for many different design and management consultancies over the years. I ran my own consulting business in design in the UK for 10 years. We then sold that business to EY and became EY Seren, and I ran that business for Middle East, Africa and India for about 4.5 years. I then went to Accenture, which is the largest interactive digital agency and consulting business in the world, and was a senior leader for them for a few years. I've then worked for Atelier, which is a Turkish design firm, part of Q Collective. And for those of you who know a bit about design and innovation, it's also the same group of IDEO, who are the kind of founders of design thinking and some of those concepts. And more recently, I was managing director for an agency called Design It, which is part of Wipro. So I've worked for some of the biggest brands out there, also a lot of advertising and branding agencies with different consulting businesses, strategy, and also government and brands. So in particular in Saudi Arabia, I've been working in and out of the kingdom for over a decade. So I'm always glad to be back here in my second or third home. I was originally part of the founding team of the Riyadh Bank Customer Experience Labs on Alhaya Street, probably about nearly 14 years ago. And then a few years ago, actually, I helped set up the visitor experience department for Saudi tourism as well, where we launched Brand Saudi, we launched Cruise Saudi, I worked on the strategy and the master plan for Uhud and the future of the Umrah experience. So it's a passion area of mine, is designing for the kingdom. And my signature project was actually designing Amala, for those of you who are familiar with the Red Sea project. So I was part of the original team working for His Royal Highness to actually establish Amala. And we did everything from the strategy to the master plan and the project that is now, inshallah, launching later this year. So that's a little bit of credentials to say, why am I talking about design and experience? And more specifically around some of the key concepts. Quick show of hands, has anybody seen the TED Talk by Simon Sinek on Find Your Why, or Leaders Lead with Why? It's one of the most popular TED Talks. It's normally in the top 5, like I said, 30 or 50 million views. So when I worked on Amala, I had the privilege of working with Simon and his team. We had a joint venture in New York called called EY Sinek, where we really developed the purpose and the passion behind the Amala program. I've also worked with the IDEO team, who are the people behind design thinking and the books around both design thinking and indeed life design. And I also teach design academically in Dubai, where I'm a lecturer at the Design and Innovation University, teaching Emirati nationals about experience design. So this is very much a passion area of mine. And I've brought together these ideas from business, consulting, academia, and design together, using psychology as well, to create this new version of life design. So just to frame that a little bit further, what do we mean when we say design, and why is that all relevant? So normally when we say design, we might think of product design, so designing physical things. In this case, this is a business that I have a share in the UK, where we created cricket bats. So I designed everything from the brand to the actual styling of cricket bats, a very physical product, as you can imagine. We might also think of digital design or UX design, product design, where we can think of journeys and user experience flows, apps and services. These are, again, some of the journeys that I've done for government services in the Middle East, through to wayfinding apps in Mecca, digital banks in Kuwait, or loyalty programs across the region. So designing different apps and digital products can also be considered an experience design. We can also think of urban and environment or interior design. This is actually the original master plan for Amala, probably about 6-7 years ago, the original master plan with Foster's, and working together with all the architects there, through to concepts you can see in the bottom left here for the Uhud area outside of Medina, so future experiences and urban landscape. But we can also design less physical things. We can design conceptual things. So over the course of the last decade or so, we've taken the idea of design and human-centered design and applied that to business and business design. And that's what a lot of management consulting is now based upon. So in business design, we talk about designing value propositions, or designing roadmaps, or designing the experience of a customer segment, or a strategic roadmap, or a strategic plan for organizations. So using the same ideas of design, but applying it more to business concepts. And then finally, of course, in today's concept of the event is service design or customer experience design, where we talk very much about personas and journeys and connecting individual needs and wants with behaviors and stages and steps. And so all of these concepts that I've been using, or you may have come across, and I'm sure you'll come across more of throughout the rest of today's event, brings us to life design. So how might we actually bring all of those ideas together to say, instead of designing just a product or a place or business or even just a journey, why not actually design our own lives? And actually, what we learn in business and design and psychology and experience can be just as applicable, if not, I think, even more suitable for life design. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. So may I introduce you, therefore, to the LYFE model. So LYFE is a framework based on 5 discrete modules. They act independently as well as work collectively together. And they are reflection of ourself, our environment, our history, and those around us. It's then manifesto, so creating our own charter of what our life needs to be, what it wants to be next, and how we will go about it. We then go about a series of story crafting methods where we think about the different narratives, the different journeys, and the different pathways that our life could potentially take. We then think about how we're going to experience those stories and the life that we want to live, and actually experiment and start living that life with purpose and intent. And then finally start creating and building our own legacy. So in our lifetime, thinking about the impact that we can have, how we might measure that, and what might we leave behind for the next generation. And throughout each of those stages are a number of underlying steps and influences from those previous examples I mentioned in business design and psychology. So for example, in reflection, we talk about personas of ourselves, personas of our family, persona of our colleagues and other people around us to help us understand who we really are, what those people all really need and behave and think like, so that we can build empathy in that community to actually understand how our life is currently interacting. We can also then deep dive into our beliefs, our passions, our purpose, our values, to help us orientate what our purpose and vision might be. And that can be a combination of using management techniques in strategy. It can be psychology techniques in terms of purpose design. And then in Storycraft, we think about, as I'd mentioned, journey mapping and actually thinking about potential paths we might take. That could be a typical day in the life. That could be a day at work. It could be the next year ahead. It could be a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan. It could be starting a family, starting a business. It could be getting married. It could be helping your children through exams, which is one of the ones I'm dealing with right now. So we have lots of stories that we need to think about. So actually crafting how we might want them to be rather than just living them as they come. So actually having that intentional creation to it really can be quite powerful. And then in experience, we can even think about, well, how do we start putting that story together and start living it? And we have concepts in here around, for example, in agile development in technology. We have a concept around backlogging our needs and our requirements. So we gather requirements and say, these are all the things we want to do, whether it's in business or life. But then we need to break it down into little sprints and little deliverable iterative cycles where we sort of create it, live it, experiment, iterate, and then move ahead, and then bring new requirements and new changes back into the focus so that we're actually always in the zone and working with intent, but also building up a long-term plan. And then finally going back to legacy, we can think about things like, what is the world around us doing? What is the impact that we're going to have? What can we control? What can we not control? Because a lot of that often clouds our judgment. We get worried about what's happening in the world around us when it's out of our control. So even just being able to think about that helps us to, again, create focus and then get impact from the people, the purpose, the journeys, the stories, and the experiences that we're crafting. So that's the holistic framework. There's a lot of material and a lot of thinking in there, as I mentioned, based on social and psychological science, business design, and innovation. So we can't cover everything today, but I definitely wanted to preview some of that with you. And just to kind of help summarize that, I guess, when we think of our life holistically, a lot of the time, especially in psychology, the focus is on looking at the past. So analyzing the past, maybe even in business, we look at how did we get here today? We look at our market, we're looking at as-is status analysis, and we diagnose what we have available or what we've learned, which is fine, and it is one of the inputs that we should use. But we also have to recognize that it is the past, it has been lived, it has been experienced, and we can use that as a foundation for what happens next. But it doesn't stop us designing and pivoting what may come beyond. So that lived experience that is often reflective of, psychoanalysis, isn't really what I'm talking about with life design. It's beyond that. In the life experience we have available to us, it's much broader. So we're living in the present and the next moment. We have cognitive psychology, we have social psychology, we have applied psychology. There's many more fields of thinking that's available to us. Anthropology, observation of what's going on around us, but also creativity. So design, innovation, technology, experiences, feelings, emotive moments, but also business, things like change management. Actually, if you think to yourself, you want to change a habit, are you good at doing that? Do you have a framework in mind? Do you know how to make a change in your life? Probably not. It's probably quite difficult. And if you look at psychology, psychology will tell you to analyze the past, to try and understand why maybe you have this habit. But in business, we go about change management professionally. We take a scenario around us and we think about how do we take the people, the environment, and the strategy and create a series of techniques and stages that will facilitate change. But we don't do that in our own life. So we can bring the learning from each of these into one place. And I think life is probably the best place to start.
Bismillah.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit of echo overhead. I guess it's from one of the other events. And that brings us, to the future. So what will eventually be the lasting experience? And then we can get into some really exciting ideas around future casting and futurology. How many of us have really ever spent time anticipating the future, genuinely? Not just, I want to make money or own my own home or, retire at 50 or 60 or 75, but thinking about what is the world going to be like in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now? What are the trends that we're seeing and how might we anticipate the life that we need to prepare for and start designing for that and living for that so that we're actually ready for it. So you can think of life in those stages, the lived experience, the living experience, and the lasting experience. And to make it a little bit more fun and also give you a metaphor that I use throughout the methodology is that of story crafting. So for example, if you're a book reader like some of us, you may be familiar with the concept of a biography or an autobiography, right? Maybe some famous person that you like, and you might have read their biography or their autobiography. The question we have to ask ourselves is, if that was being done for ourselves, would we want to write our own story or have somebody else tell that same story about us? And that's the real difference between a biography and an autobiography, is because if you don't design your own life, and if you don't tell the story of your life, and if you're not the hero or the protagonist of your own story or movie, if you think of it that way, just remember that you're a supporting act, a cast member, or a side detail in somebody else's story. And that's the big realization that a lot of the people I work with find quite empowering, is that unless you're living and defining your life as the hero of your own story, with story and plot lines that you've decided to address, you're not writing your own autobiography, and you can expect somebody to write one about you later. And that's quite scary, but also quite empowering, to let you know that you're in control of your life to that extent. You just have to start with that frame of mind to realize that you are the hero of your own story, and you do also play a supporting role in other people's stories around you. But how you act as a director, as a producer, as a cast member, and as a storyteller is what will make the difference. I'm going to pause there before we go into the first of the stages. And before I do that, Has anybody got any comments or reflections on anything I've said? Okay, quick show of hands. Does the idea of customer experience connected to life experience make sense so far? Yeah? How about, are you seeing how some of what we do in business, like strategy and change management and branding, plays a part in your own life? Yeah? Seeing some nods of heads. And also, if I was to say, I think the best way to do all of that is as a designer, because design by nature brings together all other disciplines, all other inputs of empathy and requirement, and then uses creativity as a way to craft the future state. So design, and therefore customer experience, innovation, business and psychology, is the connecting glue. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's have a quick look at some of the toolkit. And if we'd have had a bit more time, and today's room would have been set up a little bit differently, you would have all been given a copy of these as worksheets and spend a few minutes actually going through it. So as I take you through some of these sheets now, please feel free to contact me afterwards if you'd like to get a copy of them. Actually, they're deliberately designed in a particular way. Let me just explain that. So these are, I call these the canvases in the toolkit, and in each of the 5 there is at least 5 canvases. So we're talking, 25, actually there's almost 50 canvases across the whole toolkit, and it's constantly being evolved and adapted. And you can do one or many of these as you get more and more into the idea of life design. But I've tried to make them as practical as possible in that you can print these out, so you can be very low tech, and you can print them out A4 or A3. They tend to work a little bit better as A3, if you can, because you have a bit more space, and just scribble and write, and rub out and print it out and do it again. Because that tactile way of being able to workshop it for yourself in your own time or with others works very well. You can also, what I found it works very easily, and I'll share JPEG files with you for this reason, is you can do something very simple, which is just set the background of a PowerPoint or a keynote to the JPEG, and then just write over the top using a slide. And you can do that in PowerPoint or in Google Slides. So again, pretty low tech, but it keeps it digital. It allows you to just sort of use it on your laptop and keep a note of it. Maybe you can share it. We've actually got it in my family where we've shared it with each other, and actually we can go into each other's different canvases and see what they're writing and give feedback. Actually works really, really well. And in a little while, there will eventually be a full digital experience, and there'll be apps and interactive tools. But as you can imagine, that takes a bit more time to develop. But actually, there's not always necessarily a need. And the paper and the PowerPoint works very, very well. Again, we still use it every day in design and consulting. And despite the jokes we make about keynotes and death by PowerPoint, it kind of works. So don't be afraid of it. Right. So that being the case, this is one of the tools in the reflection stage. So it may be familiar with you in the sense of, we call it the persona canvas. So in customer experience, in marketing, in branding, we often talk about customer personas or audience personas. Sometimes we call them segments. There are some differences. For today, it doesn't really matter what the differences are. The idea is about building empathy with the end audience. So in customer experience, we're trying to understand who that audience is, what do we know about them, and then that way we can connect our product fit with their needs. Now, a quick show of hands, who's ever either created a customer persona or worked with customer personas and segments? Okay, most of you. Okay, have you ever created a persona of yourself? No, right? But now that I'm talking, I bet you can see how it makes a lot of sense to do that. Because how well do we actually know ourselves? We spend a lot of time analyzing everybody else, especially at work. We think about the customer, we think about our supplier, we think about our manager, we think about target customer, loyal customer, but we think about high spender, we think about, all of these different segments. But when was the last time you actually took even 5 minutes to think about who are you in the same frame and lenses and criteria as the analysis you put on others. What are your needs? What are your motivations? How do you think? What kind of personality are you? Why are you that way? You know, what is it that you see, you feel, you think on a daily basis? What influences that? So imagine actually going through that activity using this canvas. And in the canvas, there are different sort of worksheet areas that are based on a lot of common techniques of other industries. So we have, you know, what we call the big 5 ocean strategies of personality. So you just fill them out. And you have empathy canvas, which says, what do I see, feel, think, and hear? And you have that on your canvas, and you just fill out the boxes. So the different boxes are actually pulled together from all of those different industries I'd mentioned, from business, from psychology, from design. And even if you don't have the time or the interest to understand all of the science behind that, you don't need to, because that's kind of what the LYFE program and the LYFE method has done, is to say, I've pulled it all together, and I'm creating simple worksheets that all you really need to do is follow the process and trust that the process actually gives you what you need. So later on, when the books are published, you'll be able to read the science and the theory and the methodology if you're interested in that. But actually, if you just want to get started and start improving your own life, you can just pick up the worksheets and fill them in and start actually making an improvement on any one of the 5 stages. So that's kind of how it works. So that's the persona canvas. And the idea is you would fill that out, as I say, for yourself, and that can be quite insightful, and it might uncover in new areas that you either didn't know about yourself. It might help you build confidence about what you do know, and it will help you focus on the things that you're able to hold on to say, these are the elements of my personality that I'm going to either use to my advantage or think about how I might want to change and improve. And then, again, in business and marketing and customer experience, when we create those same personas for our other stakeholders, our vendors, our customers, etc., you start to build a whole portfolio of these personas. So you might have one for your wife, or your husband, or your children, or your mother, or your elderly parents, or your friends, or your boss, or your manager. And the more of that you can do, the more holistically you will understand the most important relationships in your life, and also the same criteria and the same elements from them as yourself. And you can start to feel the connections or the differences. And what you tend to find, or what I certainly find when I've done it and when I've helped others do it, is that empathy of either similarity or indifference can be, again, really powerful to help you understand, well, if you have a difficult relationship with a relative, why is that? And actually, it's not just because they're grumpy or moody. It's because, the life and the day that they have is particularly stressful. They're quite time constrained. They're very tired. And actually, they're frustrated because maybe they're not achieving what they wanted to achieve. So now you can empathize with when you talk to them and they're very standoffish, where that's coming from. So you have to think about, well, how is the best way to now relate to that person? Can you use another part of your personality, which is maybe you think of yourself as, well, I think I'm a good listener. But maybe you don't listen to that particular person very well because you just never really made that connection. So maybe you listen at work or to your customers, but maybe you don't listen to your relatives because you make some assumptions about them. And I'm just giving an example of those different relationship dynamics. But the more of that you uncover, the more insightful it becomes. And that's literally just using one tool within reflection. And there's probably about 6 or 7 other tools just within the reflection state, building on psychology, psychoanalysis, business analysis, branding and market analysis, all coming together to help you understand your own life. I'll move on again to the next stage, but any quick points? Any comments? Quick show of hands if you agree with how it works. Okay? Okay, good. Glad to hear it. Right. So once we've understood, and again, I'm just to make the point, the tools I'm previewing today are those that are maybe a little bit similar to those in customer experience. So some of the others are a bit more business-centric or design-centric or innovation-centric. So I'm sorry I can't share all of them with you today. But in the next stage, I'm going to talk about manifesto. So maybe let's say we've spent that first step reflecting on ourselves, we understand who we are, we understand maybe a bit more about others. What do we want to do with that information? How do we actually find focus? Well, we call it actually writing our life manifesto. Or to put it another way in business, this is the strategy phase, okay? So once you've done the market analysis, then you can create the strategy. What's the North Star? What's the blue ocean strategy? What's the 1 year strategy, the 5 year strategy, the long-term strategy, the short-term strategy? So you can see our strategy has lots of levels to it, right? But actually, what's your life strategy? Maybe you have one. Maybe you call it something different. Maybe you call it your long-term plans, or maybe you call it, your ambitions. But actually, we have some tools and methods, again, with a lot of social and business science behind it, that is proven to be effective, that we can use for our life. And in this particular canvas, I bring together a lot of the teachings and methods of the Golden Circle from Simon Sinek. So again, having worked with the Sinek team, the popularity of both the TED Talk, the podcasts, and the courses that he runs, he's pretty much one of the leading thought leaders on purpose. But actually, it started in business, and if you watch the TED Talk, it talks about finding your purpose in business. But now it's really focused on finding your own purpose in what we call the why of your own life. But when we talk about the why, it's hard to immediately understand your own purpose. And you might understand what you do, you might understand how you do things, but you don't necessarily always think about why you do it. And that's what this canvas is really all about. And to help you get there, we frame the Golden Circle with some other attributes. Again, like we see often in business, in marketing, your values. What are the core values that you feel are important to you? Or maybe the principles in which you live by, You can start to also pull out a few objectives and goals. So thinking, actually, but my purpose is this because I'm trying to achieve that, So actually, there's no right way to get to the answer. It's a canvas of exploration. You can start and finish anywhere you like. So some people I work with jump straight to their purpose and their vision statement, and they go, well, I know what my vision is. My vision is to be a great parent to my children, right? That's what I live for. But some people say, well, I'm a nurse, or I'm a health professional. That's who I am. So I start with the what I do. That's what I do. So that's what, my purpose, right? But actually, then when you reframe and look through the same lenses of why, how, and what, with the extra information of your values, your principles, and your objectives, you might find you shift a little bit the why towards the what, or the what towards the how, and it just starts to become a little bit more concrete in your own mind, and you gain confidence and you gain clarity. And that's why we call it things like your North Star or your guiding principles, is because this stage is really about not telling you the answer, but helping you chart the direction of travel in which you want to go. Because life will change. Even if we design it as best we can, things will obviously happen that are unexpected. But knowing the direction in which we want to take and the principles and the values that will be used to make decisions in those next stages are what we often haven't really spent time clarifying. They're probably held inside us, but we haven't really spent the time putting it down on paper like we might do at work. So that's the manifesto. And again, combined with the other tools, you literally get to a stage where you almost have an entire strategic blueprint of what life could potentially be. Bearing in mind, I'm personally a believer that there's no such thing as a fixed strategy. That's both in business and also in life. But certainly having focused strategies and having strategic plans in place that you execute, come back to, refine and update is definitely what is helpful, and that's really what this is about. So, let's move on. Now we get into storycraft, and actually storycraft and experience are my two favorite stages personally. I mentioned earlier the metaphor of, being a hero or a protagonist in your own story. And I'll hold on to that metaphor if I may. So we think about journeys in customer experience or in business, and everybody's obsessed with journeys, journey mapping, service blueprinting, as-is analysis, future state. That's fine. But let's do that for ourselves. Let's apply the same principle of diagnosing a journey that we have today and identifying the pain points of that journey, identifying what are we thinking at different stages, how are we feeling at different stages, what could be being done instead, what are the options that are available, and therefore a future state of that same journey. Do we need to make a change in ourselves? Do we need to make a change in the environment, in the people, in the process, in the tools, the techniques that are around us? So journey mapping is a very easy to use tool that we can very easily apply to our own life. But I like to think of the journeys of our life as the stories of ahead. So both the stories that we've learned and the stories that are ahead of us. And if I jump ahead just a little bit more, the reason I call it storycraft is because think of yourself as either a film director and writer or, an author. It depends if you're a movie buff like me or a book nerd. I don't know what your particular story channel of choice is, but I like movies, right? So I think of it as being both director and producer and star of my own cinematic world. And so there's no one movie. We're not creating one version of life or one journey ahead. It can be multiple movies that are ahead and also multiple plot lines within those movies. That's kind of how I like to think of it. And when you have a story, there's a lot of storycraft tools beyond just the classic customer journey that are available to us from, the sciences and the arts of storytelling and branding and communications that are effective at helping us empathize with what's happening, what's going to happen, and the lesson that we learn from that story. So bearing in mind, writers, directors, producers, and actors have done the hard work for us, and that goes back centuries, by the way, to, amazing writers. Actually, it was Aristotle, the philosopher, who created the concept of, the sort of ethos, pathos, and logos of life. And, that's the emotion, the rationality, and the credibility of a narrative, and how that is how we are psychologically influenced. And so how you tell the story to play on those three elements is how well that story will connect with you. And we're going back to Greek philosophy. And my favorite example of when that exact philosophy was used is when Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek. You've always heard of Star Trek, right? The movies. In Star Trek, the three principal characters, Captain Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy, each represent those three elements of Aristotle's original philosophy. Because for that story to work, you need emotion, which is Captain Kirk. You need rationality, or logic, which is Spock. And you need the Doctor to bring the credibility. So they literally used that format of storytelling to create that. And it gets done all the time, by the way. In the toolkit, you'll see lots of other story arcs. You'll see things about peak and end, how to start a story, what happens in the middle of a story, how to end a story. There's a handful of very effective ways in which you can think of it. So you might think, actually, that was the way I remember a story, is I remember it as a tragedy. That's okay. But actually now I'm going to think of my work and I'm going to think of it as, a romantic story, because there's a particular way that if you go through those stages, it connects and resonates. Or I might think of it as an action movie, You'll see in the toolkits later, my favorite way of explaining the classic action movie is Die Hard. You've seen Die Hard? Everybody seen Die Hard? It's the classic action movie, and it's the simplest plot line. The plot line is called Man in a Hole, okay? Normal guy falls into a hole, gets out of the hole. The end. That's the story. And that's pretty much the story of every action movie. is normal guy, has a problem, faces the problem, hits rock bottom, has to climb his way out, and then pretty much is at the same point that he was at the beginning. Nothing really changed, but he just faced the challenge in the middle. There's a few other variants where you maybe end slightly higher or you start slightly lower. And story crafting as canvases and tools helps you go through all of that. So in the worksheets, there are journey maps, but there are story arcs. There are how to think about plot lines, subplots, bringing your personas in as the cast and characters, who are the heroes, the protagonists, the villains, the supporting acts you need to think of. And you start to build your cinematic or your biographic world and how you might start to author it in the way you want to tell that story. It's very, very powerful, but also a lot of fun. So I hope some of those examples resonated. Okay, we need to get towards the end. So then we get into experience. So even to the point where we have written a series of stories, we now have to start living that experience. And so I'll give you this example, which is one I literally just recently launched, and I hope to share with you. We are still technically in January, so we can still think a little bit about New Year's resolutions. Who actually does that on an annual basis? Who tries to keep a New Year's resolution? Anybody? Okay. Who normally is still keeping their New Year's resolution by Feb, March? Okay, not many of us, right? This lady here is stronger. I saw the hand go up. Okay, that's fine. We all do it. So you know what we can do? We can start to bring in change management strategy into the process. Because motivation and willpower alone, to promise yourself you're going to go to the gym in January, or you're going to lose weight this year, or you're going to get a promotion at work, or spend more time with your kids, or travel more, or whatever your New Year's resolutions might be, they're probably going to fail if you rely only on motivation and willpower. But if you start to bring in some of that science in change management and social psychology, you stack the odds back in your favor. And this canvas helps you do a little bit of that. It helps you actually think about habits, behaviors, actions. It helps think about both mindset as well as physicality. It helps you to pull out what some of those resolutions might be, and then think about even measurement and KPIs like we do in business. Say, how are you going to track progress and hold yourself accountable? So this is a really fun one. And I can tell you now I did it with my kids, and we have a weekly check-in. And so far, it's working really good. So this is one of the newer ones, but it's a lot of fun. Okay, we are getting towards the end. So I'm going to end on legacy. So with legacy, this particular canvas, just for the sake of closure, is actually the control canvas. So at the moment, I'm working with a lot of people who are worried about the future for very valid reasons. There's a lot going on, as there always is, but right now there's a lot going on in our world that gives us anxiety. That could be geopolitical and regional events. That could be economics, and obviously what's going on in our own individual lives. And trying to navigate all of that is very difficult for people because we don't really know what framework or what's the toolkit to deal with all of that. We just do it the way we think best, and some days we do it well and others worse. And the control canvas helps you put control back in your own hands. It helps you, first of all, to separate what you can control versus what you can't control. And just creating that clarity of separation and helping you understand how do you then address the things you can't control, and therefore the things that are in your control, what might you be able to do with them? So I hope that helps. The last thing I'll say about legacy is, again, using the idea of the cast, the crew, the story, and the filmography. One of the techniques that I often see both self-help coaches and life coaches use is they ask people to think about, actually there was a very famous quote by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. I love the quote, but I'll tell you why I'm not a fan as well. He said, imagine your life is over. You're dead. The life you have lived is already happened. Now, wake up and realize that whatever's left is what you need to live. Obviously, he said it in slightly more eloquent words than I did, but you get the point. And it's quite hard-hitting, if you think of it that way. So again, what I see a lot of life coaches and self-help people say is similar things. They'll say, well, actually, imagine your life is over and what someone's going to write about you. You know, what would be their memory? It could be your family, it could be your friends, it could be a eulogy, you know, or it could be... Actually, I mention it only because, first of all, I'm sure you agree, it was a bit hard-hitting, but it's also a bit grim. It's a bit... Like, if you want to think about your future, if you want to think about your legacy, it's not great to think about when you pass away. Alhamdulillah, we don't like to think that way. So I want to bring it back to the way of a story crafter. So think of your legacy as, again, if you were a film director or an author's legacy is the collection of works that they have produced. I'm a fan of Quentin Tarantino, for example, the director. I hope that resonates with everyone. Tarantino said, I'm going to make 10 movies. Khalas. 10. And when he's done, and by the way, he's making the 10th one now, so it will be the last one. And when he's done, he's done. And he will be remembered by then those 10 movies. The 10 stories he chose to tell, the way he chose to tell them, with who, when, how, and what happened, and the impact those stories made. But his legacy isn't what happens in the story. It isn't the violence of the story. It isn't the cinematic moment. It isn't the cast of crew. It isn't even the money that each movie made or didn't. It's the collection of stories that he chose to tell. So the filmography that he leaves behind is the eulogy. And when we go back, and if we look at great people, we'll go back and we'll look at their Wikipedia, or we'll look at their filmography on IMDb, or we'll look at an author. If you're a Harry Potter fan, J.K. Rowling will be remembered for all of the Harry Potter stories, right? Not for all of the things that she does personally. So think of the stories you're going to create being the pieces of the legacy that you're building. And that's why I like to pull through on legacy. And it's, again, learning from other industries like life design and coaching, but also, I think, improving upon them, and hopefully not thinking about when we pass away, but thinking more about the impact that we can have as designers of our own lives. So thank you for attending this session. I will leave you just to say that LYFE as a program is something that I am now working with organizations, teams, executive coaches, and also on the publicly available material, the book series, etc. I'm also working as an independent consultant, having now left corporate consulting. Pleasure to be back in Saudi Arabia and hoping to be doing much more work back here. But hopefully you've been able to understand the concept of life design in relation to how I've got to with it. There is a number of future seminars, workshops, masterclasses, tutorials, etc. available. Some of that will continue to be available free and publicly. Some of it is in the commercial material that I offer, and some of it is incorporated to the work as I do as an executive in management. And so thank you again all for coming. I hope you enjoyed today's session. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and please feel free to come and talk to me either today or tomorrow. I'm actually chairing a couple of panels later today and tomorrow as well, so inshallah I'll get to see you all again. Thank you. Ma salama. Shukran.